Let's turn our attention to this now. Calls are growing for South Africa to cut ties with Israel. This as President Cyril Ramaphosa has called on Israeli authorities to immediately release South African and other international activists detained after the interception of the Global Sumud Flotilla. Among them, the Chief of Mvezo in the Eastern Cape and the late Nelson Mandela's grandson, Mandla Mandela. The flotilla carrying humanitarian aid to Gaza was stopped by the Israeli Navy in international waters. Ramaphosa has said the interception was unlawful, violated international law and an International Court of Justice order on unimpeded humanitarian access and amounted to another offence against global solidarity with Palestine. South Africans confirmed on board include Mandla Mandela, as I just said, Zukiswa Wanner, and Reaaz Moolla, with reports of others detained. Mandela released a video before his capture warning of his quote-unquote abduction by the apartheid state of Israel and calling for government intervention. So let's unpack all of this. I'm joined by Dr. Atilla, Kisla, International Justice Cluster Lead at the Southern African Litigation Center, as well as SABC News International Editor Lance Classen, and Madison Bannon, Global Sumud Flotilla Digital Content Lead. They all join me to take the conversation forward. Let me start with you, Madison, and good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. So let's start with the flotilla and the progress that it was making and these events leading up to the interception. We are reporting that it all happened in international waters. How close was it to Gaza, and was this kind of interception to be expected?
Hi, thanks so much for having me. The interception was absolutely expected. This is not the first flotilla to attempt to break Israel's illegal blockade on Gaza. They've been ongoing since the blockade began in 2007. So there's kind of a standard playbook that Israel uses, and we knew that by 150 nautical miles, we were entering what we called the orange line, or the danger zone of interception, based on previous interceptions. So it was to be expected, though we were still very hopeful. They did sort of allow us to get much closer than they had previously said. They said it at 150 nautical miles they would intercept, and we were able to get more like just past the 100 nautical miles border to Gaza. So that's where the interceptions happened, and they began on Wednesday night.
So what was that moment like, that interception moment? We've seen in the past other flotillas being intercepted by the Israeli authorities. You lived through it, you were there. What were your worst fears, and how did it eventually then play out?
So I'm not there. I'm not on the flotilla. I am home in Johannesburg. But what happened was on Wednesday night, they began by intercepting the Alma, which was the lead boat where most of the prominent activists, including Chief Mandla, Greta Thunberg, et cetera, that was at 9 p.m. The Israeli Navy didn't have enough ships to intercept all of the boats at once. So they intercepted a group of 7 to 10 boats. And they did so. It is illegal to intercept those boats. As you mentioned, it's in international water. The mission is protected by international law. And they also did it quite aggressively. They were shooting water cannons. We watched that live on the live stream. There is reports of them putting out a very large chain across the water that boats then hit. And reports of some boats being rammed by the Israeli Navy, just keeping in mind that these are civilians on a humanitarian mission. This is not a military intervention. These are regular folks, including Zukiswa and Reaaz and Carrie and Fatima, so some of our other activists on the boats. So it was quite scary, but of course they jam communications. So the live stream, you see the activists take position in a brace position. And at that point, they've thrown their phones overboard. And then when the Israeli occupation forces board the boats, they cut off the communications. There are video of them turning cameras around or turning them off. And so at that point, we lose our picture, which is quite scary, especially knowing these people and having worked with them, to not know what really is happening. But again, because this is in a long line of flotillas and attempts to break this illegal siege, we do have access to just the standard procedure of what could happen. And that's what we were expecting. So right now we're just following through that process.
All right, let me pause you there, Madison, and apologies for that confusion about whether or not you were actually physically there. But let me bring in Dr. Kisla into this conversation. Doc, good afternoon. So there's a bit of a toing and froing with Israel saying that they were, the activists on the flotilla were approaching what is a naval blockade that is in place, an active combat zone, and while the activists are saying that they were in international waters. How important is that distinction between being in international waters and being in an area where there's active combat and there's actually a naval blockade that is in place?
Thanks so much for having me. I think so. If we look at the operation of the flotilla, we cannot look at it in isolation. We have to look at it in the context of what is happening on the ground in Gaza. And that starts with the unlawful occupation of Gaza, as confirmed by the ICJ in its advisory opinion. But we also have to look at it in the context of the ongoing genocide, the famine, and the starvation of the civilians in Gaza. At the same time, we have to, of course, take the ICJ provisional measures into account, which ordered Israel to allow access for humanitarian aid. So against that backdrop, we have, of course, these legal paradigms, such as the international humanitarian law and the Geneva Conventions, which set out the free passage that the states like Israel must allow for free passage, like medical equipment or humanitarian aid. But more specifically, with respect to the naval aspect of this issue, we have something called the San Remo Manual, which is considered to reflect to a large degree binding international law. And that manual sets out that a blockade, which has the sole purpose of starving the civilians or civilian population or denying them essential objects or damaging the civilian population, is prohibited. So the same manual also states that the blockading party must allow for a free passage of those goods and humanitarian aid. So looking at this from an international law perspective, and taking also into account the ICJ provisional measures in South Africa's case, the conduct in question here appears strongly to be unlawful. And once we have an unlawful blockade, we cannot have an unlawful interception or boarding of these ships in question. So bottom line is that the blockade is an unlawful blockade, cannot justify the interception in this case.
Let me bring you in here. There was a moment when editors like yourself across the globe were tracking this flotilla and wondering what's the next step. What actions are likely to be taken by the Israeli authorities the closer it got to Gaza. Just tell me how difficult that was, tracking that story, but also where the story stands at the moment.
The story firstly, it was difficult tracking because we were trying to get a hold of many of the activists on board the flotilla. And it was hard because it's the Mediterranean and there was a lot of difficulty getting through. Luckily, there was a tracking, there's a tracking on the Global Flotilla's website that we followed, and we could get activists. The activists were telling us how many ships were intercepted. There were 44 altogether, and we could keep track through the morning of as to when and how they were being intercepted. Right. Where does things stand now? If you go to the Israeli authorities, they're telling two different stories. You go to Ben Gvir, who's the head of intelligence, yeah. And he's doing a tour of a prison and he's saying that we're going to keep the saboteurs here. And he uses those terms. He referred to them as terrorists on the way in. But if you go to the Israeli Foreign Ministry X account, they will show pictures of Greta Thunberg smiling, and they're saying that she's in a safe environment. Mm. So if a prison's a safe environment, I think that's the common ground of where they are. So in terms of when are they going to be let loose, 4 activists have already been let loose. The Italians have out of the 22 Italians that were on board, 4 Italians have already been repatriated. We don't know when the rest are going to be repatriated. Overall, this is the second flotilla since June. They get repatriated within 72 hours. So we're hoping for the best. It does not serve Israel to keep any of them any longer, but we don't know. The proof of the pudding is in the eating and when they get released.
Talk to me about South Africa's interest in this ongoing. This is but the latest manifestation of this crisis that has been unfolding for the last while. And South Africa is at the forefront. Talk to me about the South African activists. Are we any clearer as to how many were on board and what their status is, but also the principles that South Africa then is again emphasizing around how that situation unfolds?
There were 10 activists on board. We don't know the situation. The last that we heard from them was when we saw Mandla Mandela's video that he released before he got detained. That's where we are at the moment. There's also no South African embassy. The embassy is currently closed in Tel Aviv. So it means that there's limited access to engaging with the Israeli government. So we are virtually in the hands of the Israeli government at the moment. If by how they've operated before is that they will release the South Africans probably last, because for obvious reasons, because we've taken them to the ICJ. So that's the thinking that we have. But hopefully that this will be sorted out shortly.
All right, Madison, just a parting shot from you then. This is obviously, as Lance says, the second flotilla to be intercepted in this way. And it appears as if this is a new strategy that international activists are keen to deploy more and more. In fact, before we even wrapped up with this particular development, Lance, I already was reading that there's another being lined up, another flotilla being lined up from Italy, I believe, Sicily. So this as a strategy of highlighting the plight of Palestinians in Gaza, how effective is it? And is it helpful in terms of the people in Gaza themselves, in that the aid inevitably doesn't get to Gaza, but does anything else get achieved in these flotilla missions?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we can say that this is a massive success in terms of mobilizing people. It's a huge media moment. I know I attended 2 actions yesterday, one outside of the U.S. consulate and one that is a weekly picket outside of the McDonald's in Rosebank. That weekly picket normally has about 12 people, and yesterday it had well over 100 people. So this is a really galvanizing moment, and we've seen statements come out from trade unions, from the president, from DERCO, from politicians, from faith leaders, et cetera, coming out in favor or in support of the Global Sumud Flotilla and pushing for an end to the genocide. It also allows us to push different targets in terms of closing the Israeli embassy and ending coal trade with Israel, those kinds of issues. So the Global Sumud Flotilla and the kind of boats that they were on, which are small sort of sail boats holding just a few people, we're never going to carry in the amount of aid that Gaza needs. What Gaza needs is at least 600 trucks worth of aid every single day in order to save lives. Yeah. And that is the responsibility of Israel to end the blockade. That's not the responsibility of activists. So the idea was to open a humanitarian corridor and hold it so that more aid can flow in.
All right, let's leave it there for this afternoon. I've got to thank all 3 of you. Madison Bannon is from the Global Sumud Flotilla and is digital content lead. We were, of course, also joined by Dr. Atilla Kisla, International Justice Cluster Lead at the Southern African Litigation Center, as well as SABC News International Editor Lance Classen.